We good? Everybody got their coffee? We're back to Ephesians, cruising through, and finally to a spot where a lot of the single people will be like, well, do I need to be here for this message? And actually, yeah, if you are not married, this is for you. Because if you're thinking about marriage, this is the idea that you need to learn from this, so you are looking for the person that models this. And so this is going to be an interesting conversation today. So let's dig into this and go back a little bit. Somebody read Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, please.
Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God.
Excellent. Be imitators. Walk in love as Messiah loved us. Yeshua submitted his will to the Father. He was willing to sacrifice his will, his ego, his life for God. That was where we began last week. Let's fast forward to verses 17 and 18. Bruce, verse 17 and 18, please.
Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. 17 and 18.
No, just 18, yeah. Yes. So we just said, be imitators of God. Be imitators. And then he says, Paul says, understand what the will of God is. It's not to partake in drunkenness, which we talked about, the pagan rituals and the pagan gods, but that we could look at it today as any type of addiction or any type of alcohol or drugs or social media, or anything that distracts you from connecting to the very next verse, which is the idea of being filled. Connecting. Every day, if there's anything that is drawing you away from connecting to God, he says, move away from that. Don't partake in that. That's just like partaking in the pagan gods. This is the will of God for you, to connect every day. And it's only then that you can actually do the very next two verses. Aaron, 19 through 21.
Addressing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord in your heart, giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence to Christ.
Sing praises. Let your words be good. Live a life of gratitude, giving praise to the Father every day. It's then and only then that we can move to the next few passages. Somebody read, this is a long one, really loud, verses 22 through 33, please. Deb?
Wives, submit to your own.
Oh, wait, we can stop there. No. Just kidding.
Just instead of going all the way to 30.
Let's just do that first one. We're a little late, so we can just end on that verse right there. Go ahead. Say it again. Wives, submit to your husbands. Go ahead.
Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become flesh.
33.
33. Okay, this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband.
Excellent. Interesting. So I've heard from people in the past, like from a worldly perspective, this is Paul the chauvinist. This is Paul, the patriarchal hegemony. We got to break this down and get rid of this because this is so wrong. This is the idea of hashtag cancel Paul. Like, do away with him. He's telling you to submit to your husbands. And one of the original translations in the King James Version, it says that you are to fear your husbands. Wives, fear your husband. In verse 33, it actually says, however, you too, everyone, let each one of his own love his own wife as himself, and let his wife see that she fears her husband. That's what my translation says right here, fears her husband. I mean, what kind of a guy is this? Why would you be giving this type of marital advice? Who says such a thing? Why would a woman submit and subject herself and fear her husband? And one of the things I've been saying about Paul for, 18 years now, is sometimes it's hard to teach on Paul because he's so misunderstood. He's so taken out of context. You can read his words and you can say, oh, this is what Paul means. But is that really what Paul means? Is he really that easy to understand? Especially if you're reading this. It would be in question. So Paul uses a ton of imagery, which we don't have a whole lot of time. So we're just going to focus on two things that he talks about here. Two of the images that we've already discussed that you should already know. The head and the body. What is the head? He says that the husband is the head of the marriage, the head of the wife. We've talked about head before. Is head the hierarchy? He's the top of the chain. He's the CEO of the house. Whatever he says goes.
I was just thinking, it's the thing you put the helmet on.
We talked about the head already. What is the head? You remember? When I think of a head in Hebraic perspective, is it the hierarchy or is it, what is it?
Steers.
Steers?
Oh, like guides?
Source. When we think of the head from a Hebraic perspective, it's always the source of a river. It's the source of the head. This is the source of what giving you directions. It's giving you wisdom. It's telling you the source of everything that you have. The husband is to be the source. The source of what, though? It was interesting. Oh, there's that. Wednesday was a busy day a busy day of watching TV, right? We were watching the news for hours. I don't think I've watched the news ever that long. And I don't know why I couldn't pull myself. I was working on the couch and I was watching the news and I think I watched 12 hours. We were just constantly there. And I woke up Thursday morning. I'm like, I gotta do something. I gotta go work out. I gotta get out of this house. But the winds were still whipping early in the morning. So I got up and I did a thing of yoga. I put my phone on the floor and I'm sitting there. I pulled it out and I set the mat out and I'm sitting there and I stand up and I'm looking at the wall and this is what I see. And I'm staring at this and I'm not listening to the YouTube person. I'm just staring at this in this pose and I'm like, did I connect at all yesterday? Did I connect at all today? Have I been so wrapped up in the storm and what's going on, all these things going on, did I ever once stop and just pray? Did I connect myself to the source that I've been telling you to do every day? And so here I'm staring at this outlet. And so for the next 30 minutes, I'm kind of just doing my own stretching thing, but it was that time that I got to just pray. I was alone in a bedroom, and I just prayed for 30 minutes. It was convicting to me, but it was such a reminder. I felt so proud of myself. I was a little bit like Aaron. I was like, look, something spiritual. If the husband is the source, can he affect the energy in the house? Can the husband change the mood of the house? The wife can change the mood too, yes. Yeah. But can the husband come home angry from a bad day of work and change everything that's happening in the house? Can the husband, break something and then everybody's walking on eggshells because dad's mad or husband's mad? Can he make a house feel fearful or scared? Or can a husband and a father also make a house feel safe and secure? There's an old saying that from the church I used to come from that said, if you reach the man, you reach the whole family. Which I didn't understand that years ago. But in general, the husband is the one who has the responsibility above everyone else to connect. It's his job to connect, because when he connects, then the rest of the family will follow along with that. When he's the one that sets the example for the Messiah, the rest of the family looks to him. And think about it. What is that connection look like? Let me read Luke chapter 6. Jesus says this, "The good man brings forth what is good out of the good treasure of his heart, and the wicked man brings forth what is wicked out of the wicked treasure of his heart. For out of the overflow of the heart his mouth speaks." Let me back up. I read the wrong verse. Verse 43 first. "For a good tree does not yield rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree yield good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For they do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. The good man brings forth what is good out of his good treasure of his heart, and a wicked man brings forth what is wicked out of the wicked treasure of his heart. For out of the overflow of the mouth, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks." The wicked man. What? I'm kind of struggling this morning. As I look at this, it's, what do you produce? What type of tree are you? Paul says it in verse 9 of chapter 5. He says this. He says, "For the fruit of the Spirit is all goodness and righteousness and truth." The fruit of the Spirit. We've had this conversation before. What is the fruit of the Spirit? If you're at Crossroads, you should have this memorized. Do you remember?
The fruits of the Spirit are goodness, patience, kindness,
Okay. And what does it say just before that? Galatians 5:16, it says this, "And I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh." Walk in the Spirit. Connect, in other words. This idea, did you just read from that? Walk in the Spirit. I was going to be so impressed, and I'm like, it's on the board. Yes. Mm-hmm. This idea of connecting, this idea of walking in the Spirit, it's imagery of I'm going to connect, I'm going to walk, I'm going to connect to this everything. And if I do connect, this is what happens. You will produce fruit, whether it be a good tree or a rotten tree. If you are connecting to the Spirit every day, this will be the fruit that you produce. The Spirit, from the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Who's the fruit for? Not you. A good tree produces, if it connects to the Spirit, love, patience, kindness. Is this your family experience? Is this what your spouse, your children experience from you? Love, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control. I know growing up in a family that did not know God, that did not connect, those were nowhere on the list. Sometimes I would come home and I would be walking on eggshells depending on how my dad came home and what type of a day he had at work. And don't ask him a question, because if he breaks something, he breaks a lot of things then. What type of experience is your family? Ephesians 5:23. Alex.
For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself the Savior.
Yeshua is the head. What did it say Yeshua did in verse 2? And walk in love as the Messiah also loved us and gave himself for us. What is his example of love? What does it mean to be an example of love? Anybody? In this context, what is the example of love? To walk in love as Messiah did. What did he do? He sacrificed. He sacrificed his will. He sacrificed his ego. He sacrificed himself. For whom?
For everybody else.
For the body. He sacrificed himself for the body. Verse 25, what does it say? Husbands, love your wives as Messiah also did love the assembly and gave himself for it. Love your wife as Yeshua loved the body. Love is what then? Self-sacrifice, service, provision, nurture for the body. Give to the body above yourself. Have you ever heard the phrase, it's not about you? This is the idea of love, is just self-sacrifice. And isn't this what leadership is? Didn't Jesus say, don't lead like the pagans do, where they have lordship over each other and they tell you, I'm the boss and you do this and you do that. He said, instead, you are to serve those. Yeshua was the perfect example of a servant leader. And here Paul is saying, if you want to love your wives, then be like Yeshua and love as he loved the body. Sacrifice your own ego, your own desires, your own will for the body. If this is your man, then if this is the type of man that you had, then how would you treat him? How would you treat a man who constantly lived and sacrificed his own desires and his own egos for you? How would you treat him? I remember I was doing marriage counseling years ago, and I was talking with this couple, and they were just at each other's throats. And I was trying to give advice, and one person said, well, I'm not changing until she changes. And the husband said, what? I'm not changing until she changes. Right? The amount of pride and anger and arrogance, like I'm not doing anything until I see it in her first. How does that work out? Does it? No. It's constant battling, constant bickering, and never getting better. But we learned a long time ago, nothing changes until what? Until I change. And that was hard to get through the head of people who were just absolutely prideful about what they thought was right. I'm not doing it because they're doing this. But maybe if you change, no, I don't care, I'm not changing, then nothing's going to get better. Well, then so be it. For Paul, who is the person that he says must change first? The husband. Love as Yeshua loved the body. Sacrifice your own desires. We've said this before. How many relationships get broken and ended because of somebody has to be right? And we've said over and over and over, what is more important? The relationship. The relationship is always more important than you being right about, who played so-and-so on some sitcom, or, what you want for dinner, or this or that. The little things that separate us, that break us and divide us. Is it really that important to be right? Or is the relationship more important? Paul says, husbands, sacrifice your own ego. Stop it. Sacrifice your will. You are to be selflessly devoted in love with your spouse. The man who lives his life devoted to the best interests of his family, defined by God, he sacrifices his ego and loves his wife in devotion to her. This is who Paul's called you to be. So then, women, hopefully you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Great. Paul then says, submit to him. This is your obligation. Defer your leadership to him because you know that he has your best interests at heart. Aaron, what does 33 say?
However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Right. I said the word there was fear before. The Hebrew, or the Greek word, next one. The Greek word for fear is, do you have the next one? It's frozen. Darn it. Oh, there we go. Okay. For everyone to love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she fears her husband. The word there is phobia. It's used almost every time in the Greek New Testament as fear. It's only used one time in the Greek New Testament as revere or respect, as some of your translations said. Which makes me think, okay, so maybe Paul's not thinking of the Greek word phobia. He's not thinking of fear. What else could he be thinking of? If he's thinking in Hebrew, what word is that? Do you remember? Yirah, which means what? Which means what? Awe and fear, right? Both. Reverence. It's this idea of revere, reverence. You are to Yirah, your husband. Be in awe of him. That's right. That's what I want to hear. Yes. Be in awe of your husband. In other words, man, how can you respect your husband? How can you revere your husband? Well, when you're in public, do you insult your husband in public? Do you put your husband down in public? Do you embarrass your husband? Have you seen this at a restaurant before or at a place where the wife just tears down a husband in front of people? That's not Yirah. Don't try to appropriate his position. Don't try to take his seat or usurp his authority. Like, don't worry, I'm going to take care. I'm in charge. I'm going to do this. Don't put him down. If he's willing to sacrifice his ego for you, does he deserve that you destroy and tear down his ego even more in front of everybody else? I mean, women, I don't know if you know this, but we men, we think we're pretty tough, but our egos are actually pretty sensitive. More so than women. We pretend to be tough. But our egos is why Paul says, put your ego aside, sacrifice your ego for your wife. And so if we're willing to sacrifice our ego, what then do we need from you? And we need to be showered that you are like in awe of us. Thank you. Give us that pat on the back when we need it. Build up our ego because I'm constantly working hard to sacrifice it for you. Your job is the Azir Kenegdo, right? From Genesis chapter 1. Your job is to be the perfect helpmate. In other words, one of my mentors said, the Azir Kenegdo can also be translated the perfect enemy. Why? Because you know every little thing about your husband that is good and that is bad. And your job as the perfect enemy is where he is weak, you are to sharpen him and build him up. Like iron sharpens iron, you are to get into him and help him to become the best man that he can be, which sometimes the husband doesn't want. I don't want you to tell me I suck at this. But she does it anyways.
Well, now I'm going to
On this note,
On that note, I'm out. Yes. But why would she do this? Why would she confront me on something that I'm weak at? Because she wants me to be better. But, as Paul says, that shouldn't be, right? She can do that in public, in private, pull me aside like, hey, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have done that.
The other part of that is, number one, I said, this is what we should do. But we have to do our part too. We have to, and that's what some of this verse seems to, it touches in the beginning, but it really doesn't. We have to earn that respect and that awe. We just not about it.
Well, you hit it right on the head. Your job is to sacrifice your ego, which is what earns you that respect. You don't just automatically get it. Your job is to be the source as Jesus was the source. Your job is to sacrifice your ego and your will and these things. Your job is to lift up your family as more important than you and to make decisions for your family that's going to be best for them over you. That earns you then, Paul says, respect. But what happens if you don't act that way? You don't get it, right?
It shouldn't be like a quid pro quo.
It shouldn't be. I'm just saying in reality, it's really hard to submit yourself to the husband when he's selfish and he puts himself before you. And you shouldn't be surprised if she doesn't look at you in awe. She's still told to, but it is an obligation that isn't a quid pro quo, but these go together. It's like the good tree and the rotten tree. Like if you're a rotten tree, you're going to produce rotten fruit, and that's going to affect everything around you, including your spouse. And if she's getting, there's children in here, if she's getting crap to eat from you every day, well, how's that going to work?
Well, you know, it's funny you talk about dressing down in public and stuff like that. My family, when they were all still alive, would be my wife. And my wife, when we're out in public, or when people are around, she serves me. She can't do enough for me. She's doing exactly what you're talking about here, being that awe and everything else. And they used to say, oh my God, you're such a good life. And I'd say, yeah, walk in that door at home when nobody else is around. And then, yeah. But the point is,
But Walt, don't.
the point is this, is that, I think as a culture, it's hard to come from different cultures.
Right.
As a culture, they knew they had a responsibility, she has a responsibility out in public to not, address my downfalls.
Right. Right. And that's the culture that he's, affirming. Yeah. Your job is to lift your husband up, especially in public. But you're also the Azir Kenegdo, so you sharpen him, make him better. Make him a better man, a better father. Multiple times, Andrea and I, we've had these conversations. Should you have had that conversation with the boys? Should you apologize? to the boys? Should you have done this? Should you have said that to Roman? I mean, many times. And many times I've had to go back and apologize to my own kids. My father never would have done that. But I give credit to my wife because she came to me and said, was that the right thing? She never did it in front of the kids. And she'd never do it in front of anybody else. But she was my perfect enemy. She still is, right? She still is able to confront me in private and say, is that the right thing to do?
I think one of the beautiful things about marriage is from the very beginning, God takes two people that grew up in certain families,
Certain paradigms, yep.
paradigms, certain ways of dealing with conflict, all of those things, and brings them together. And it is a refining fire for two people because it's a lifetime of learning, of really submitting and breaking down the harsh things that maybe there were habits from before, ways of dealing with conflict or ways of resolving things that shouldn't be the way that it is, you know? I mean, I know like for Bruce and I
Put that iron back in the fire.
You keep going a little more, and let it cool down.
hey, the first 10 years, that's exactly how it was. And I do say that jokingly now, but it was very difficult for us for the first 10 years. And it was because we had two different ways of dealing with things. And I know my way wasn't right. I know that I came from a family that just swept conflict under the rug and acted like it never happened. You know, you don't talk for 2 weeks, and then you just show up and start talking again and act like it never happened. So when I brought that into our marriage, it was hard. I mean, that was just one side of it, you know. But I like that, you know, in verse 21 it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So our relationship begins with our relationship with Christ. It begins with allowing God to do that, to speak to us and to confront us on our weaknesses and submitting to that. And it's not easy. It doesn't always happen this way.
No.
It still doesn't always happen this way, submitting to one another. But it is something that God has, you know, worked on us.
And
from the
I
very beginning.
and I wonder
4 years.
in the Talmud, in the Jewish literature, it actually the home, the emphasis of the attitude that takes place of the home, Jewish literature actually puts the emphasis on the wife. Like you want the home to be good, you want that to be a good tree, a good fruit. In Jewish literature, it's the wife a lot of times. Paul is just different. Paul says no, it's the husband. So it's interesting. It's both. Like, and he says, you know, you're both to submit and reverence to Christ. I don't know why Paul puts more of an emphasis on the man than the rest of the Talmud that puts the most of the emphasis on the wife. I'm not sure why. But there's a difference here. And I don't know if it's because of his own history. In my opinion, to become, well, not in my opinion, factually, to become a Pharisee, you had to be a husband and you had to have children. To become a Pharisaic teacher. Who's Paul's wife and children?
Did he?
Well, either he didn't and they made an exception, or my belief is something happened. My belief is, I think that if going to the beginning of his life, he was a very angry man, right? Didn't he persecute the church? Why was he so angry? Was it just, why would he leave the Pharisees and go to the Sadducees to persecute these people? Why would somebody have that much, because they wouldn't cross lines like that, theological lines, unless my opinion, he was angry. My opinion. I think he lost his family somewhere. Death? Why would you be so angry?
Well, he's always talked about the thorn in his side. I wondered.
That's right.
Wondered what that was.
And I wonder if there's any guilt here and say, if I was a better husband, I should have sacrificed more. I don't know. This is all conjecture.
Yeah.
But as I look at all of these things, I don't know.
I just listening, reading, I'm taken back to Claire's wedding, and you and Calvin shared teaching, but I don't really remember what you said. But Calvin,
Pretty normal. I get it. I know. I'm used to it by now.
Calvin saying, challenging Clara to respect Daniel,
Yeah.
and challenging Daniel to love Clara.
Mm-hmm.
This is not your nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your nature to love.
Right.
It's not your nature, Clara, to respect. But that's what he needs, and that's what she needs.
Yep.
And I think thinking forward from that, and I just thought that was very clear and cut and spot on. But so we're to serve as Christ served the church. That's not to say that Christ was not frustrated.
Oh, of course not.
Church.
No.
And I smirked because I was thinking about The Chosen, where Jesus goes to Ema. It's like, Ema, they just don't get it.
What is the church to Christ? I mean, because from my probably false understanding of Christianity, I believe, when they talk about Christ in the church, I'm thinking of, the Catholic Church or the early church, but it wasn't. It was the synagogue.
Well, yeah, the church is a bad translation. Ecclesia was this like a body, a group, just like this. Right.
What did he do? I mean, he went and turned over tables and
Right.
preached the hell, right? So.
Which is why I said, like, he's to sacrifice and to do these things according to God's desire. He still has to make tough decisions. He still has to do things. He doesn't just, it's not like a puppy dog. We're like, whatever you want, honey. That's not what that means. He still has to have a leadership role of like, I know what God is calling me. I'm connecting, and I know what God is calling me to do. So I have to make decisions that's going to be best. Sometimes the family isn't going to agree. Do you think, it was kind of a hard decision to move from Phoenix, Arizona to here? But Andrew's like, yeah, let's go. My family is not going to talk to us for a few months, but I'm okay. If this is what you think, let's go. And they didn't. They were pissed.
It's normally a blessing in my family when they don't talk to you.
I'm not married, but I grew up, so last night I had to share a story at Silver Recovery about my life. And I kind of shared what you said about your dad, but I grew up in a household where my dad was really harsh and abusive, and there was a lot of chaos. I mean, when I was 5, they divorced, and my dad cheated on my mom. And so it split our family pretty much since I can remember, And so I grew up not trusting men, and it was really a struggle to learn how to submit, or what submission was, and what this whole thing was. I would immediately be wait, to be in awe of your husband. You know what I'm saying? I would have an attitude towards it. But I learned over time, kind of what you're saying, the actions of my dad really impacted the entirety of my family, even when we were split and my mom remarried and all these things. Just seeing the things in me, the self-hate that I had, because I felt I wasn't loved by him, I felt loved by him. And I carry that in every other relationship of my life. And so, I don't know, I know y'all were talking about some specific things, but just in an intimate way, because my dad struggled, he's different now, and thank God, and my whole family, because of my brother and my dad, I believe, trying to get better, my whole family is starting to heal for the first time in forever. But my dad prayed to God the week before my brother decided to go to rehab and said, God, if you hear me, because he was hopeless, he said, if you hear me, I'll never pick up a drink, I'll never pick up another drug if you save my son. The week later, Randy said, I want what God wants for my life. I'm done doing this. He's been a heroin addict since I can remember. He is now working at the rehab, helping people. My dad is sober, and he's a different person. And so, like, all that to say, like, me and my mom loved God my whole life, but there was a wholeness. There was a wholeness when the men of my life decided to heal and to love, like, well. You know what I mean? And so, anyways, I just wanted to say that and share that because I don't know, like, when I think about being in a marriage in the future, like, all of these things are super helpful, but I just think back about, like, what I didn't have growing up, and, like, there's a real hole when a man is not loving like the church. And when I say church, I think just a body of believers. He died, you know, I believe he died for us, and he was a sacrifice. He was a Messiah. He gave up his ego for all of people in eternity for grace. And when I think about that, you know what I mean? Like, I think about a man and the men, like the men of God that I know, like, it's watching them, how they love their wives and stuff like that, how they love that way, like a self-sacrificial way. And I don't know, I just, I think about as a wife, or as a woman even, just in workplace or whatever, like men in my life, and just feeling the need, or feeling that space for that spiritual leadership, like wanting to work with someone and wanting to have that, I don't know, that spiritual leadership in my life, that man role in my life that's like, you know, just loving me in the way that Christ loved the church. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, that was a little bit. I don't know if that's But the other thing, the video that I sent you as well, she says, like, that God also uses the word Ezer, maybe not Ezer Kenegdo, but Ezer to describe himself to Israel. And it was like a strength that Israel did not have. And so a woman as Ezer Kenegdo to a man is like, it's a strength, like Andrea with Matt, you know, like it's a strength that maybe he does not have, not in a disrespectful way, but in a flowy